Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Mainstreaming Integrated Corridor Management. My name is Deborah Rouse, and I'll be helping facilitate today's webinar. This webinar is sponsored by the Federal Highway Administration and is hosted by the National Operations Center of Excellence, also known as NOCOE. As a quick reminder, if you don't know already, at NOCOE, we offer a variety of resources to support the transportation system management and operations community. On the bottom right side of your screen, you will see a box called Useful Links. You can browse through those links for TSM&O resources and news. Previous webinar recordings and case studies can be accessed from there. To cover a few logistics for today's webinar, we are recording this webinar, and the recording along with the presentation slides will be available through the on-demand learning section of our website. All the attendees' phones are on listen-only mode by default, but we'd like you to stay engaged by using the question pod for comments and questions. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar, so if you have any questions, we encourage all of you to enter them into the pod as they come to your mind. The questions will be read out loud one at a time by the moderator, and our presenters will answer each question. So that is all I have, and I will now hand it over to our moderator, Neal Spiller, to start us off.
Thank you, Deborah. Hope everyone can hear me. And thank you for spending your afternoon with us, probably an hour and, I don't know, hour and 15, hour and a half, maybe. We'll see how it goes. In a minute, I'm going to put up a question, or put up a poll to see, get a cross-section of who is with us today. Let me just say that the real target audience of this is anyone that has an interest in ICM and moving it forward. There are probably three target audiences. The first is what I would call any agency that is deciding or trying to make a decision, is this right for us? The second would be kind of an emerging region, maybe one that has pulled together a stakeholder group, but has not began to engage ICM yet. And the third might be what we would call maybe an incubator group. But let's put up the poll question. You see that on the screen now. I think there's 9 categories plus other. And you all are starting to fill it out. That's terrific. And we just want to find out what type of organization you represent so that we have an idea of what the audience is today. I'll let this run for a few seconds and then I'll come back. All right, well, it looks we're pretty solidly settling in on federal, state, and MPO regional representation, which is great and fine. It looks like we're in around 35% state, 25% federal, and then also about 25% MPO. So those are some good numbers, and we have a crowd of over 120, so that looks fine too. So let's end that poll. And let me get back to my slides. So the purpose of today's webinar is to really introduce a document that came out in September called Mainstreaming Integrated Corridor Management. It's US DOT's next step, if you will. Briefly, as many of you might know, we did a proof of concept for ICM in San Diego and in Dallas. That began way back, I think, 2013, 2014 or so. Then around 2015 or 2016, we gave some grant money to 13 regional incubator sites for them to prepare some documents, concept of operations, et cetera, documents And I think where we are right now is we're looking to have ICM be mainstreamed by agencies who can take it upon themselves. We are certainly here and available, interested, and excited to offer anything that we can. There are a lot of materials available now on ICM dating back to when the San Diego and Dallas proof of concept demonstration sites began. In a moment, or later, I guess I will send you to or inform you of the Office of Operations website, which very quickly just has 4 simple acronyms, if you can remember: ops, OPS, .FHWA, .DOT.gov. So ops, FHWA, DOT.gov. And that's the home site for the operations website, and up in the right-hand corner is a pull-down menu, and if you use the pull-down menu, you'll find corridor traffic management, and that has a multitude of resources. As I said, this document came out in September. There's another document recently called Build Steady and Build Strong. This is an executive-level public sector webinar. What this mainstreaming primer did or does is to introduce ICM. We always are required to do that in every primer, so some of you may get tired of hearing a little bit about what ICM is, but please bear with us. But also we get to the point where what are some lessons learned from San Diego and Dallas and from other sites. And what we would like to do is to empower transportation officials how to mainstream ICM into their own business processes. This is the table of contents for the primer. It's flat and simple. Chapter 2 has a background. Chapter 3 says, invites agencies and regions, what are your motivations and readiness for ICM? Chapter 4 gets into the weeds of what this primer is all about. What do we mean by mainstreaming? Why is mainstreaming important? How would you mainstream it into your agency's business processes? And what are some examples of ICM efforts to date? Chapter 5 is always fun. It's funding. The short answer is no. We're not sitting here with buckets of money ready to throw out to people who are doing ICM. But Chapter 5 gives you some ideas, and we can also talk about some grant programs that others may be available or aware of. And then Chapter 6 has some resources for some next steps. So what is ICM? ICM is the 3 words: integrated. Where's my next slide? Here we go. Oh, let me go back. Screwed that up. Here we go. So in a nutshell, this is what ICM is. It's combining separate agencies into one harmonious whole agency, if you will, or a pseudo-agency. Forget my bird in the background. Hopefully they'll go to sleep in just a minute. Or maybe not. In a corridor, which we describe as a travel shed of trips, a corridor is anchored by one or more trunk highways, but the corridor also includes all of the adjacent arterials, local streets, agencies, transit, bus, 511, information, media, whatever. So all levels of local agencies are involved in what we would describe as a corridor. And management, obviously, is the coordination of all of the travel activity. So if something happens on the main line, we have numerous options to mitigate some of that traffic. What do we mean by mainstreaming? These are definitions are straight out of the dictionary. Mainstreaming is to make something principal or dominant, make it a tendency, make it a trend. Mainstreaming as a verb is to send to that dominance or to send to a widely accepted group that movement or style that you want to be practiced. So there's no mystery here. Many of you have seen this slide before. What is ICM? ICM is joining all of the associated resources You see on the left there, auto, transit, public transit, parking even, creating proactive and common objectives, being multi-jurisdictional, being multimodal, and giving information to everybody all at once. But it's not just giving the information and collecting it, it's making more or less instantaneous or proactive changes onto the street network so that if there is a severe, and again, we do this for a severe and atypical incidents. This is not done day to day, as you'll see in a future slide. ICM requires 3 types of integration: institutional, operational, and technical. The first, institutional, says we would like to have collaboration among as many stakeholders as possible, because the more the merrier, in that they can provide more relief in different ways. Operational talks of the strategies to collectively manage the capacity and the demand on that corridor. Again, can it be managed day to day? Yeah. Should it be managed day to day? No, because that's what you all are doing anyway. So this really is for atypical, serious, highly congested incidents and events. And the technical side, obviously, is using the data. ICM could not have been possible 10 to 15 years ago because we did not have big data, and I put that in quotes. Big data now makes it available to assimilate and aggregate that information, which the decision support system can act upon. Here's what ICM is and is not. ICM is not kind of the old-fashioned stovepipe siloed decisions where each individual agency ran its best course based on whatever challenge was in front of them at the moment. A congestion, a work zone, a parking problem, some kind of capacity overload, something like that. It was in the relative past, it was the reactive. It was done incident by incident. And on the right side of the slide, you see what ICM is. It is the multi-agency group of stakeholders that operate via agreed-upon business rules and operate on optimizing the corridor as a whole and not in the singular parts. Before I get into this slide, let me go back just one second. Let me give you an example that we use in a video. We just produced a video which came out on May 7th. It's now available on YouTube. And if you were to go onto YouTube and just put in keywords integrated corridor manager or management, you would find a video which was posted on May 7th, which is 9 minutes long and explains ICM in kind of an executive level manner. There's a section of that video wherein our office director, Valerie Briggs, makes this comparison. Imagine, if you will, there are sporting events, there are parades, there are day-long festivities and activities that take place, there are work zones and special events, openings and out in Hollywood and all sorts of things that have to happen. Any of those special events and that sporting event or that work zone has weeks, if not months, of planning that has gone into it. And in doing that planning, it has incorporated additional roadways or turning some roadways one way or turning inbound versus the outbound and putting up signs and making accommodations for crowds and making accommodations for extra transit and connections and so on and so forth that would help mitigate that particular special event over the course of 4 hours, 6 hours, or 8 hours, however long that special event is going to run. Those are great. However, if you're out on the roads right now and an incident were to happen in a minute and a truck were to overturn and suddenly you have the same kind of problem that they have producing a parade or a special event. Now you've got roads that are closed and you're going to have to reroute traffic. You're going to have to basically do all this at the snap of your fingers against what would normally be weeks and months of planning. So ICM, I'm not saying that it replaces it necessarily, but it's going to mitigate an event that might be a 6 hours long traffic crash, accident, severe event, it might mitigate it down to 2 and 2.5 hours. That's what we're trying to do with ICM. ICM is implemented through something called a decision support system. A DSS supports the business rules and the decision-making activities, and for the most part, the DSS is agreed upon in advance by all of the major stakeholders. The DSS is programmed with all of the responsive elements of those stakeholders. So traffic signals that can be switched, ramp metering that can be switched on and off, HOV lanes that can be enabled if they need to be, DMS messages, local street traffic, parking garages, traffic system, bus bridges, all of that individual agencies can provide can be brought to bear upon an incident that would otherwise shut down that trunk highway. And decision support systems are very common elsewhere. They help run electrical grids. They make decisions when somebody hits a telephone pole and the pole goes down, they got to reroute the electricity around it somehow. So there are decision support systems in the medical community. There's decision support systems in the military. How do we, what are the best ways to move an army, that sort of thing. What are the best decisions that need to be made? So these kind of decisions that need to be made very quick and responsive to an incident or a situation that has arose relies upon decision support system in the real world, and that's all we're attuned to here. Is we've enabled and support that a decision support system can act objectively when an event occurs and can give you multiple alternate options. We've often talked about DSS in the concept of a chessboard. The chessboard itself is the physical area, in other words, the region. The chess pieces are the individual stakeholders. Some can make small moves like pawns. Some can make larger moves like queens, rooks, knights. And they are all specific in what they can do and rather specific in some things they can't do. But they all must work together. And the decision support system looks at the business rules, and anyone who's a chess player knows that there are an infinite number of strategies that you can apply to chess, and you are constantly switching that strategy as your opponent makes his or her move on that chessboard. So DSS, in the context of ICM, monitors for atypical events and alerts triggers that would invoke a DSS response. Managers then accept or decline, and they would do this based on their knowledge, their real-world knowledge. For example, if there was a water main break somewhere or schools were letting out or something, and they might say, it might not be the best idea to route traffic down that road. So maybe they would say no, but mostly they would say yes, let's do this, because if we want to get people on and home and on different routes, we need to enact these changes. So the managers accept these rules, and that initiates the pre-agreed rules, the business rules that I talked about earlier. And this is what comes to bear. You're looking at a picture of the San Diego project that has all of the portions of an ICM consideration in play if there were to be an event on I-15. So why are we asking people to invest in ICM? From our pioneer sites and our 2 proof-of-concept sites, we are thoroughly convinced that the interagency cooperation and coordination is vastly improved, as is situational awareness. We have the data available, as I said, because big data is now available to crunch those numbers. And the DSS is working in the background to say, this point in time versus a week ago, same day, we're sitting on a Tuesday, May 19th right now, but a week ago Tuesday, a month ago Tuesday, a year ago Tuesday, how was traffic? And the DSS looks at it and make a decision, well, things are equal, better, or worse. And if they're worse, then maybe the DSS would kick in with a trigger and say that's what we need to attack. Coming down to the last, please bear with me, I'm almost through my presentation, then I'm going to hand it over here in just a second. But another item that is on that website, the ops FHWA DOT.gov website that I gave you earlier is an item called 10 attributes of a successful ICM site. And here are the first 5. First of all, is there significant congestion? Well, DSS is going to work in the top 40 congested metropolitan areas. It's probably not going to work in rural Wyoming or South Dakota or Iowa. But you need to have, ironically, congestion in order to have the candidacy of ICM. Do you have sufficient infrastructure, which would be, of course, the parallel streets and routes? Do you have multimodal capabilities, which is transit, bus, rail, and other platforms? And here's an important aspect that we've uncovered. It may not be that during the course of an individual event that's going to take 4 to 6 hours, that a transit agency is certainly not going to turn around, their rail system in 4 hours and then turn it back again 4 hours later. That's not possibly what we're talking about. Maybe a bus bridge or something like that. But over the course of providing information to the motorists, we may be able to start planting the seed in their mind that if they want to continue to have reliability on that trunk highway, one way they may be able to do it is gain through the reliability offered by the transit companies. So if we can get some of the people off the road and get them to switch from street to transit, that's where the transit option really comes into play. Not necessarily for any particular event that's going to be over the course of just a few hours, but for somebody to make a decision over the course of multiple days or weeks and say it's probably in my best interest to at least put transit as one leg, if not the full leg of transportation from my work to my home. You see the couple other items there. Here's the last 6 through 10 attributes. Again, is transit available even to do that? Are these systems optimized? Is there public dedication to this change and support for this change and institutional support? You don't have to have all 10 of these, but you certainly could guess that if you have 7, 8, or 9 of them, you're probably a strong candidate. If you have only 1 or 2 of them, you might be a lesser candidate, but that doesn't say that you shouldn't look into it. I'm going to step aside for a moment, and I'm going to hand this over to my partner, Greg Hatcher, who was our consultant on the team from Noblis. They are the ones that put together that helped us put together the document, and he's going to lead you through the document itself. Greg?
Thank you. Thank you, Neal. Okay, so we're back. We're back at the beginning. Let's see. Okay, 15. Okay, so the I don't know if I did something wrong, but there we go. Thank you. So Neal gave you kind of the definition of ICM. Of mainstreaming from the dictionary. But what about when you talk about the concept of mainstreaming ICM? What exactly are we talking about? Well, this is really what a lot of you are already doing right now, where you're looking at pulling in ICM strategies into your processes, into your planning and programming processes, multi-agency of different agencies across the region, and looking at specific corridors, seeing where it might apply. Why is it important? Really, we really need to understand that without an effort to mainstream, it's going to be a stepchild. It's going to be something that's going to be done on the side, maybe a separate initiative, but in the long run, it's not going to be fully understood or supported. It's probably underfunded when staff turns over and things of that nature. It's going to lose momentum. So it's just a necessary step, obviously, and many of you are taking those steps, and we're going to have some questions that are going to get at some of that and to see what kind of practices you're already doing, to what kind of best practices you're already applying. And really the theme here is to strive for broad, multi-level institutional acceptance. One agency can't carry this. One champion can't carry this forever. So it really needs to be a regional approach, and the appropriate agencies that are involved with that corridor need to be all on board. So what about the institutional? What I'm going to go through here is just walking through some of the best practices in the document, some of the lessons learned that we pulled together. And we got these from all the previous deployments and planning grant work that we did. We pulled together all these into the document. And so we just wanted to share some of the findings here and see how they apply. So how you mainstream ICM across agencies, what are some best practices for that? You build on an existing collaborative group like a TSMNO committee or something like that, an operations committee within the region, within the MPO. Not saying that there doesn't have to be some separate meetings. There will be a need for separate meetings sometimes, but it should be in the context of the overall processing group. And it shouldn't be something that's just on the side, we're going to do ICM. There should be at least one committed champion. To start, certainly to start out, you need that. Maybe down the road, you'll have champions in each agency that are involved. But at the beginning, you need at least one to start it. You need a lead coordinator, whether that's the MPO, whether that's the state, whether that's a city person, or some county level. Doesn't really matter. Just somebody needs to take ownership of helping to guide the process. Organize and train staff. Achieve multi-agency support. You definitely need support from your leadership. This is a big question about, can you articulate the benefits of ICM? If you're, does ICM really provide a good return? Is it effective from a benefit cost perspective? And engage stakeholders. You really need to find a way to get all the stakeholders involved that are, especially that are engaged in the most high need corridors. Need to get them involved and find a way to have early wins that they benefit from and they can show their leadership. So these are some of the things that we put in the document for mainstreaming ICM across agencies. The next topic is transportation planning in general. How do you mainstream ICM in the transportation planning process? Well, one thing you can do is make sure that your transportation goals are sensitive to ICM impacts, like reliability, things of that nature, mobility impacts. Safety, we didn't find so much so far, but certainly that can be an impact and environment. Certainly on major crashes, you can definitely see that you can get some environmental emissions savings benefits, that kind of thing. But anyway, the main thing is you have to be able to look at the variation in traffic when there's major events and see if you can mitigate those. And it's not so much just the day-to-day traffic. Use the resources that our highways providing. Office of Operations and Neal done a good job of cataloging a bunch of good resources for you to use that hopefully will help you to mainstream ICM into your processes. Use simulation, analysis modeling simulation tools as appropriate for your situation to evaluate the benefits of different ICM strategies and how they can help solve transportation needs and problems within the area. Incorporate ICM strategies into TSMO plans, the Transportation System Management and Operations plans. We saw a lot of that with some of the sites that have been starting to plan their ICM systems and how ICM fits into the TSMO plan as far as getting a systematic approach for kind of incorporating ICM into the six-year plan or that type of thing. Looking at mid-level planning documents where you really are putting in things that are going to be funded. So that brings me to the next point. of making sure that you consider ICM strategies in your planning studies and alternative analyses. You got to look at ICM shouldn't be held as shouldn't be excluded from benefit cost analysis, but should be looked at as one of the strategies and a suite of strategies that can be brought into the region. But they need to be included in your studies, in planning meetings as well. I mean, it could be certainly a topic to be talked about, and really just making ICM part of your standard regional process. Looking at how you can effectively fold those into the process. So I think we're going to put our next polling question. This polling question is about funding sources. But we also have another one that we'll put in later, but this will give us a heads up for the funding that we'll be talking about. What funding sources have you used or committed for ICM? Maybe not just talked about, but actually committed. And what you've used already for planning studies, that sort of thing. We don't have a specific one for planning grants, but whatever the source of funding is, you can put it in there. I'll wait just a moment for this to be done. Looks like we got a pretty good response here. You can check all that applied, by the way. And as you can see, you're already doing a good job in integrating different funding sources for integrating and mainstreaming ICM into your region, because you're not going to be able to rely on the grant programs for the long haul, and certainly not for operating and maintaining your systems. The federal aid seems to be the biggest one, like CMAQ, Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program, Highway Safety Improvement Program, National Highway Performance Program, and others. STP, block grants, that kind of thing. The federal grants have been used by, looks like 31%, and other 10%. Local and regional, 26. State, state is the biggest with 43%, almost 44%, pretty close. Okay, we can go ahead and close that poll. So definitely shows that you're being creative in using a lot of different funding sources and turning towards making sure that investment is needed in the area. You're going to be committing your own funds to that. All right. Do we have the question on planning? The planning processes that we could put up? I'll go ahead and go to the next slide while we do that. Mainstream, how do you mainstream ICM into the transition programming process? Not surprisingly, you would include ICM projects in your tip, but more importantly, make sure your project selection procedures consider the impacts of ICM. Consider the delay savings that can happen in major incidents, and the fact that you can make your system more reliable over time that way. Okay, why don't we go ahead and do this poll then? Because it gets at the previous slide with planning process. You can check all that apply, but what if any planning processes have you integrated with ICM? You're here to see the results here. The first choice is adopting ICM-centric goals, using analysis modeling simulation, incorporating ICM into TISMO plans, integrating ICM into planning meetings, considering ICM strategies and strategic plans, planning studies, and alternative analyses, including the tips, project selection procedures considered the impacts, and federal funding opportunities. We have a really good mix here. That's good to see. It looks like you're doing a lot of these things we're recommending here already in terms of integrating ICM into your planning processes. So this is very encouraging. So we can just leave it open for a moment and then we'll close it. Okay, you can go ahead and close the poll. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you open? Is it open again or not? I wanted to read the results. Okay. Well, it looked like across the board. There we go. Yeah. So, adopting ICM-centric goals was 39%. The biggest one here was incorporating ICM strategies into TSMO plans. That's very good. We've got almost 70% there, 68%. Looks like 26% of the respondents said AMS tools. 54% said include in alternative analyses and planning studies. 32% said include in the TIP, Transportation Improvement Program, and 17% considered the impacts of ICM in project selection procedures. So that may be an area that needs some more. The utilizing federal funding opportunities for ICM projects, 44%. Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. Again, just to wrap up the programming side, mainstreaming ICM would be to, of course, include those projects as needed and as opportunities present themselves. And funding is always an area of concern. There's not enough funding for a lot of projects, but in order to compete, you got to be able to put those projects through the selection procedures and get them into the TIP. All right. What about mainstreaming ICM into project development processes? Well, the best practices here would be planning for incremental deployment of your system. You may want to start with getting a common operating picture of your region with the different agencies, so that you can have something that you can all look at that shows the conditions across and describes the conditions across the system, all the different agencies that are involved in the system. Certainly use the system engineering process. It's really an ITS type project, ICM is. So you use system engineering process, update your regional architecture and use it. You may find that there's opportunities to share data that you didn't immediately think of back in your regional architecture. Have some ideas for you to enhance your ICM project. Recognize that those projects are like ITS projects. They're like TSMO and ITS projects. Very similar, and that's kind of the theme for the funding. In operations and maintenance phase, mainstreaming ICM some best practices that we highlighted to you include those kind of components, those kind of elements into your operations. Maintenance contracts, technology refreshes, and equipment swap outs. Anytime you're looking at getting a new procurement for something, you look at the opportunity that ICM can play in that, or that you can put some building blocks in that you can use for ICM later. Incorporate ICM into performance review meetings. From a operations and management standpoint, you want to have performance review meetings on a routine basis. This is something that San Diego's been doing for many years, where you look at the performance of your quarter over the period of time, over the month or whatever, and look at how the ICM system responded to those different events that occurred, and see what tweaks need to be made to your operations, because you'll never be done, basically. And there's always room to improve, and new things happen in the quarter. Address ongoing operations and maintenance roles and funding needs. Of course, that has to be done. You have to look at allocating the funds for operations and maintenance, or else it'll die on the vine, and you'll have the situation where you had a nice decision support system that's not really useful anymore. Here are some locations of ICM efforts, and mostly still, some of them are still going on. Most of them are still going on in one form or another. Some of them are in the past. But these are just areas, both the pioneer site processes are represented here, as well as the planning grant sites in the red dots. The shows San Diego and Dallas, of course. There are other emerging deployments in North Carolina, Kansas City, that sort of thing as well. But these are some of the historical ones as of last year. Broward County, Florida, also. So that all the planning grant sites, the 13, are represented here, and they're all at various stages of deploying their systems and considering ICM in their processes. What about funding? Funding is one of those things that's one of the difficult topics about funding your ICM, especially when you talk about multi-agency, because you might have to figure out who's going to pay for what in your system. But generally, you want to consider ICM into all those plans, your short and long range plans, as we said earlier. You want to decide whether to incorporate ICM into your budgets. Really, putting it into your budget is really what you have to do. But in a situation where you're losing gas revenues, things may get cut, so be prepared to defend that. It's just a few organizations might add ICM to larger project proposals for discretionary grant programs, for example. We'll go over a couple of those programs in a minute. And take into account whether your agency will budget for long-term operations and maintenance, which you really need to do in order to have a system that works over time. So again, incremental deployment is the only way to do it, really. And so you sit down with your stakeholders and figure out kind of how you're gonna build it out, how you're gonna increase the capabilities over time, and what that means in terms of budgeting, shared resources, and that sort of thing. Where can funding for ICM be found? Federal grant programs have been used in the past mainly, but they're also still used today, such as the HUC-MTD program. We'll look at the next slide. We'll get into those. CMAQ program, that's Condition Mitigation Air Quality. Highway Safety Improvement Program, National Highway Performance Program, STP, STB block, and metropolitan planning activities can certainly fund ICM planning activities. So some of this is going to be your mix of federal aid, and then state and local dollars. Discretionary grants. the Advanced Transportation and Congestion Management Technology Deployment Program, HECMCV, the BUILD program, better utilizing investments to leverage development, and infra, the Infrastructure for Rebuilding America. I don't know whether there's others that should be on here. Maybe you could provide us some information on that if you've used other grant programs for ICM. But these are some typical ones. Okay, so now let's put the last couple of questions. Those were some best practices from the document. Certainly be interested in feedback on those, and we can add more things as we go. Keeping the program, at least from a standpoint of cataloging lessons learned over time. Best practices. So thank you for your attention there. Do we have any more poll questions? I know we have one more. Can you pull that up, Deborah? I don't see it. There we go. Oh, okay. No, we've done this one. The one that's about the is the fifth one. I'm sorry for this, folks. We're just trying to get organized with these questions, and then we'll get to your questions. Yes, this is 4 and 5. Okay, good. We'd like to get some feedback from you as participants in this webinar. What do you consider the most important need to explain the benefits of and to make the business case for ICMD management? What is the most important thing? Anecdotal case studies, quantitative benefit before-after data analysis, simulation studies, or other? So the most, you probably say you want all of it, but pick the most important need. It looks like okay. We'll leave that for a little bit more. So it looks like that so far it looks like quantitative business. Before after data analysis seems to be the biggest one, but let's keep it up. Keep it open for a minute. Okay, you're going to end the poll. So 87% actually said quantitative before after data analysis. 8% said simulation studies, and one person each chose anecdotal case studies and other. Although the anecdotal case studies can be powerful if they're done right, but certainly quantitative before and after data analysis seems to be the clear winner here in terms of importance for making a business case. Okay, let's move on to the last poll question. Okay, this question asks which of these would be the most helpful to you in advancing ICM deployment in your region? And the answer, the choices are incremental development guidance for ICM deployment, including DSS options. Number 2 is guidance of case studies and funding sources used for ICM. Number 3 is updated benefits information evaluation guidance that applies to a range of urban areas and operational conditions. And number 4 is support for peer-to-peer exchange mechanisms among planners and implementers of ICM. we'll leave it open here for a moment.
Hey, Greg, this is Neal.
Yeah, okay. Hi, Neal.
While this is up,
close this down. Go ahead.
While this is up, let me just add, I have to make my mandatory plug here for the guidance materials that we have on our website, and because it speaks to this question, we do have quite a lot of guidance, and some of the more important ones, I mean, they're all my babies, but some of the more important ones are the lessons learned from the San Diego and Dallas site. There is a completed document on that website which talks about what lessons learned came out of the proof of concept sites in San Diego and Dallas. There's one called Build Steady, Build Strong, which makes the case for the first item here, incremental development. I mean, if a region thinks they're going to wait until they got everything perfect and everybody in line and all the money funded, you know, they're never going to do anything. It's paralysis by analysis. So you got to start somewhere in doing this and hopefully build the grid, build the stakeholders, and build the project. And as more funding is available incrementally through the parties or through elsewhere, just add, you know, throw that in the mix and the cake gets bigger. And another thing that we've been preaching later, and this might sound, you know, sometimes when you market something, you have to get a little, you have to exaggerate a lot. So this might sound like exaggeration, but I'm just trying to put this in context. People ask us from time to time, you know, isn't ICM just a better way to detour a problem up on the main line? And my response my go-to response of late has been along the lines of, well, you know, ICM is to a detour as a regional disaster planning is to a local traffic accident. You know, I said before, you really don't want ICM to be running your day-to-day operations. That's not what it's for. You have, even when you put up a work zone or something, or even when there's an incident, you have response. There's EMS, there's police, there's response, there's work zone traffic plans that people have created that would, you know, help to mitigate whatever that known problem is. But when you get a tractor trailer overturn, or you get a weather event like some I saw on the news lately with dust storms rolling across the city, and firestorms in California, and you know, flooding that closes down highways, and if this is planning that needs to occur. Those of you that are familiar with Transcom up in the Northeast, a coalition of 16 state agencies, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, I don't even know that the rest of them, Pennsylvania I think is in there, Delaware, whomever, toll authority, bridges. I mean, that's ICM by rote. They started that 25 and 30 years ago, and they got that going. And because it was necessary, if something happened on one particular bridge crossing between New Jersey and New York, it affected traffic for miles around. And people were not only diverting, you know, one exit or one bridge, but, you know, they might be diverting dozens of miles, or stopping their trip, or saying, I'm not going in by car today, I'm going to take transit. So this is the kind of response that we're looking for, and I don't mean to mitigate anybody that's suggesting or using ICM as a, you know, kind of a normal practice, a day-to-day practice, a work zone practice, a detour practice. If it works for you in that capacity, great. I'm not going to be the one to say no, but I'm just reminding you that in the Federal Highways definition of ICM, it's a much larger thing. So get that off my chest. Greg, back to you.
Oh, just real quick, I'm almost done. So it looks like the biggest takeaway there was updated benefits information across a range of local conditions. The benefits information was like 60% of the respondents had that as their most important pressing need for information. There were others, like 16% for the guidance, technical guidance, and the other two had a few votes as well. Yep. Support for peer exchange and incremental and guidance and case studies for funding. So yep, those were the results there. And really, I'm going to turn it back to you, Neal, because I'm really done with my part. Thanks.
Okay. If I was, in an incubator or an emerging area, I think here's what I might try to do. We now have that 9-minute video that I spoke of, which I think explains ICM kind of at an overarching leadership level. And what I would do is I would take that to my mayor, board, and council or regional MPO and ask them for 10 minutes of their time to run that video and to introduce the concept of ICM, but also be prepared to answer some questions about, well, how, because the video provides the what, but the first question they're going to bounce back to you is the how. And then I think you go to something like these documents, the Build Steady, Build Strong, which helps to guide you to say, start low, start slow, start building, build a base, build, anything that's built is strong from the base up. And then it takes you to the document lessons learned so that you don't have to repeat maybe some of the challenges, but you might get quicker to some of the successes that were found in San Diego and Dallas. And then you might also look at this mainstreaming document, which says, now that FHWA and DOT want to promote this as a mainstream, now, our help to you, our resource center, guys like Ralph Volpe and Greg Jones and myself and others, we're available to, well, as soon as COVID ends, but we're available to visit even virtually. We're already meeting with some people tomorrow, as a matter of fact, and next month, as a matter of fact. But we're available to meet, to continue these conversations, and to get, boots on the ground and to get some things rolling. And we can come to you and speak first person about some of the attributes of ICM. I mean, another way that I couch it and present it is, every highway has its improved IT architecture. You've got data, you've got recorders, you might have ramp metering, you might have HOV lanes, you probably have an incident response team, you probably have overhead gantries, you got 511 messages. All of this IT information already exists on a particular facility. But even when a fender bender shuts down that facility for miles, because that facility just has such a very small margin of success against a congestion-related incident, that's when you're going to have to detour and use the associated arterial roads, local streets, local traffic signals are going to have to be retimed, messages are going to have to be retimed, the media is going to have to get involved, you're going to have to tell people how to do this, that, and something else, where bus bridges are picking up people and dropping people off. So that's where ICM comes in handy on a scale of that size. So I will stop my promotion right now, and I guess Greg and I will ask if there are questions from you that we can take either in the chat pod. I guess we are going to take them in the chat box. Or Deborah, I'll let you and Greg kind of run that end of it, and if I have to answer a question, I'll jump in.
Okay. The first question here is from Bernadette, and she wants to know, what does DSS stand for? Okay.
DSS
support system. Okay.
Yeah, DSS stands for Decision Support System. And a decision support system is something that is used by any large interface, and it could be how you find a book in a library. It could be how electricity is converted around the region. The military would use it, how we are going to mobilize our forces and get people from A to Z. UPS might use it, the old standby, the quickest route is all right turns type of thing. So DSS stands for Decision Support System.
Okay, thank you. And another question we got was, how is ICM different than a detour?
Well, I gave you my exaggeration a second ago, but a detour takes you off the main line, follows one route, and puts you back on the main line further downstream. That's the essential definition of a detour. An ICM detour, in quotes, could take you multiple ways. And the other thing that ICM does is it enables the traffic signals along that route or along multiple routes to favor the through. It will change from maybe, from a morning traffic signal plan to an afternoon traffic signal plan, depending on if you're, in the afternoon, people are trying to go home. So it will favor the traffic that is being sent through it and routed through it at the same time that there are other messages and routes available. So it's not just a singular route or a singular detour, or in the case of a work zone, if you got a work zone that's between exits 13 and 15 and your detour takes you off at exit 11 and it tries to put you back on the highway at exit 17 downstream, that's fine and great. But that's called a traffic control plan, and that's less a detour plan. So I think the other thing, Greg and I may be able to provide to you is we might have some kind of party favor gift that we can send out to the mailing list a little bit later. There are a list of questions that are in some other primers and that we hear often in our workshops, and so we've put an FAQ together with the most popular, I guess, is that the right word? Or the most asked number of questions, such as that, and how do you fund it, who starts it, what defines a champion. There's other items on there, but I'll stop there and we'll answer some other questions.
Okay, another question we have is a DSS system necessary to achieve integrated corridor management, and can I deploy an ICMS without a DSS?
So I can start that, and then Neal can finish up.
Yeah, go ahead.
So no, it's not absolutely necessary to start with the decision support system, but in the long run, if it's a complex corridor that has a lot of modal choices, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of diverse traffic conditions, you should consider the benefits of the DSS, building up towards that eventually. Certainly the DSS can help you with scanning the corridor for problems proactively, and can rank order the solutions for you and give you a best case of multiple plans. You don't necessarily need DSS to start though. So you really, and it's a less complex corridor, maybe your TMC operators can handle some decision making for basic strategies, but you want to have those business rules kind of codified in terms of agreed upon responses. So one thing about the DSS is it helps you to build those, hardwire those into your system. And then you can add anything if you want there.
Did other people lose the website? Because I just lost the website. Or is that just me?
Well, I don't see any questions in the question pod.
I mean, do you still have it up on your screen? Because my screen just lost it.
I still have the questions up. You want another one? You ready for another one? Okay.
Well, yeah, I'm operating only by phone right now because I don't have a screen in front of me. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, Dan Walston has a question. He wants to know, is TISMO or ICM the program to sell and market with MPO policy boards? ICM is a part of the overarching TISMO, correct? That's his question.
I think that's a correct statement. I mean, I'm not going to bang one against the other and say that one is better or one is more suited than the other. I think they both have their purpose in place. But ICM is a strategy for the right situation, and the right situation is when even the slightest of events like a fender bender or a short rainstorm that suddenly causes everybody to go bumper to bumper, or a truck turnover, obviously. When an event like that occurs, ICM should be ready to be kicked in as the as the solution, as the system. It's the interesting thing about ICM is it's not going to make the event go away because the event has already occurred, and it's very hard to tell people, well, I think that would have been a 6-hour event, but it's now only a 2.5-hour event. So I saved you 3.5 hours of time, and they look at me cross-eyed like, what the hell? I've still been sitting in traffic for 2.5 hours. You haven't really helped me. Well, it's hard to get a pat on the back for something that you can't, objectively assign to a person and say, I saved you, 168 minutes. They're like, okay, well, it shouldn't have happened in the first place. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not the one that caused the truck turnover. I'm just trying to mitigate it. So there's a little bit of a public marketing that has to take place to say, this is what we're getting. We're getting the stakeholder involvement in either a TISMO fashion or an ICM fashion, and of everybody working together to ameliorate this as best we can. We can't make it go away, and we can't free up the roads magically and part the Red Sea and let you have a straight drive home. But as a region, we're going to suffer a lot less than if we didn't have this system.
Great. Thank you, Neal. We have another question from Akila. Which agency typically develops and maintains the DSS?
That's a great question. Greg showed you a map of the 13 grant partners plus the 2 demonstration projects, making a total of 15. And among them, sometimes it's the department, it might be the state DOT, like Caltrans, for example. Sometimes it's an MPO. Sometimes it's a city taking the lead and saying, I want to do this. The city of Austin is one of our grant partners, for example, and the city is taking the lead in their ICM development. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. I can tell you that in Dallas, originally it was DART, the Rapid Transit Group. Dallas Area Rapid Transit was the original champion. They eventually handed it off to TxDOT, which was probably more, was set up a little bit better to coordinate regionally with a lot of the other agencies. But in Dallas, you've got, City of Dallas, City of Richardson, you got BART, or not BART, you got DART. You've got all these other local agencies that are participating, and the champion really does provide the impetus. Every strong group has a champion that can promote that project. So it doesn't have to be one particular one. So the short answer is, just summing up, MPO, DOT, the city, some kind of organization or some kind of quasi-organization. In the Washington area, for example, I'm not saying that they have one, but the Washington Metropolitan Area Transportation Authority, WMATA, is not actually a federal government entity. It's a quasi-government that's formed by partnership of the district in Maryland and Virginia. So a group like that could also be a champion.
Great. Thank you, Neal. We have another question here from Lee. Could you talk a little bit about the challenges of bringing together various agencies in an ICM consortium team? I'm speaking in terms of freeway management, traffic signal systems, and transit.
Well, that's a big question. Are there challenges? Sure, there are. It took, San Diego and Dallas was a little different because they came in, they each of them was part of a group of many that, I think there were 6 full-time proposals, of which we chose 2. So you're talking in the case of San Diego and Dallas with a group that had already, in effect, pre-formed for the purpose of putting the proposal together. In effect, that is what would happen. So if you had Major City USA, that they would have to, in effect, pre-form or some kind of stakeholder group that would come together through the MPO through a DOT consortium, through some other group that would say, this is what we're proposing on a regional basis. And when I say regional, here's another thing to keep in mind. If you think of spokes on a wheel, I'll use the Washington area because it's more familiar to me, obviously. But the Washington area has a beltway, and you've got Maryland to the north and east. You've got Virginia to the south and west. And around that beltway are any number, I don't know, 18, 10, 24 major highways from, US 95 or I-95 rather. You got Georgia Avenue, you got Connecticut Avenue, you got Rockville Pike. In Maryland, you've got the I-60, or I'm sorry, in Virginia, you've got I-66. Out on the eastern side, you've got US 50, so on and so forth. So when ICM is put together, it's put together on one of those corridors, and we use the term travel shed. So the group of stakeholders has to come. The group of stakeholders, for example, if an ICM were to be the Baltimore-Washington Parkway between Baltimore and Washington, up I-95 and up US Route 1, there would have to be a consortium of stakeholders from that area and from that group, which would be Montgomery County, Carroll County, Howard County, Baltimore, Baltimore City. It would not involve anybody from, Springfield and Virginia and Loudoun County and Northern Virginia. However, Northern Virginia's got their own ICM consortium for I-66. And, of course, it involves all of the neighboring counties, Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax City, Fairfax County, so forth. So the consortium's a little bit different, and it has to match and fit the travel shed of trips that will be affected when and if a major event occurs on that trunk highway in that corridor.
Great. Thank you, Neal. We have another question from Jason. Sharing of data amongst transportation entities is a continued challenge. Can you shed any light on websites or networks dedicated to sharing data in systems amongst entities?
Wow, I don't know that I would be the qualified one to answer that question. I'm going to throw that out to my FHWA peers, Ralph, Greg, James. I'm not, Greg Hatcher.
I'll take a stab at it. So
okay.
Basically, I'd say the good place to go for information on this would be the ITS standards program, as well as the data program within the ITS JPO, ITS Truck Program Office. It has a lot of good information about which standards are applicable between different subsystems, and in addition, the architecture, national architecture, ARCIT, it's ARCIT-IT. That would be one thing that you can look at for that. As far as a practical example, probably get some good ones through the publications available in those areas, and maybe we can get back to you on that as well. But
great, thank you, Greg. I'm sorry.
Thank you. No, go ahead.
No, couldn't finish. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, certainly it's a very good question, and it's an area that gets mentioned a lot.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Neal. We have another question from Keith. The decision-making for ICM can be complex depending on the incident or event. Do you see a role for AI systems in the decision-making process and the decision support systems?
Well, I see it moving in that direction. I mean, all I can say is that
right.
the purpose of the decision support system, obviously, is to present an objective number of alternates against the base situation. Now, the base situation is do nothing. So the decision support system is operating in that context and saying, if you don't do anything, here's what you're going to end up with. It's going to be total chaos for 6 hours until they move that truck. But I'm going to give you 5 alternates, which includes any combination of using these streets, these arterials, making these changes to the ramp metering, making these changes to the traffic signals, whatever. I don't know that it's artificial intelligence per se. It might be predictive, but it would be slanting in that direction. That's probably the best answer I can give you.
Okay, thank you, Neal. We have a question from Matthew. Please speak to decision response plans and how or whether these can be developed in the absence of the funding for a full DSS.
Well, response plans can take a couple shapes. For years and decades, if an incident happened on the highway, the highway department had a response plan that said, if this incident happened between exits 3 and 4, here's what our detour, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put up these signs. We're going to use this route. We're going to, we might send some police down to these intersections to help move traffic. That's essentially what ICM wants to do, except on probably multiple routes, multiple modes. But it's not, as I said in the answer to the previous question, the decision support system is thinking outside the box. It has at its availability, if you will, a dozen or more agencies. Each agency has, like that chessboard, each agency has multiple moves and multiple capabilities that they can make. And so the DSS is saying, okay, alternative 1 is going to gain you an hour against the do-nothing baseline. Alternative 2 is going to gain you an hour and 15 minutes. Alternative 3 is going to lose you a half hour because it's going to make it worse for some reason. And alternative 4 is going to gain you 4 hours against the do-nothing proposal. Let's go with alternative 4. So that's the strength of having the DSS to make that, at computer speed and with computer decision and objectivity, that otherwise humans there's just no way that you can't have humans interject, subjective reasoning into some plans, especially when you get multiple people in a room. Another way that I've described ICM, I'll say real quickly, is, in the old days, if an incident happened, everybody would gather in the mayor's office and everybody would start yapping and talking, and then eventually the mayor would say, shut up to everybody, and the mayor would say, here's what we're going to do. That's not unlike what DSS wants to do, maybe a little politer. But instead of, waiting for that reactivity to happen, by the time that meeting occurs and by the time everybody's had their say and by the time the mayor makes a decision, 45 minutes have passed. And in the case of DSS, 4 minutes might have passed. So that's why we would try to get something like that instituted.
Okay, thank you, Neal. Another question here from Jeffrey. Build/infra discretionary grant programs emphasize benefit cost analysis, and one of the things agencies struggle with is calculating direct benefits of eliminating or reducing non-recurring congestion within a corridor. One may say a corridor improvement plan using an ICM focus will be different than one focused solely on adding capacity. Are there examples of travel shed studies or data demonstrating those outcomes?
Well, certainly in the lessons learned, there's a document called Major Achievements Lessons Learned, and it's on that webpage that I showed you. And it is the post-deployment determination of success challenges and that occurred in San Diego and Dallas as the demonstration sites. San Diego and Dallas each set up their ICM a little bit differently. One was a little more hands-on, and the other was a little more computer-based and managed. And so there are some lessons learned. There is some language that speaks to benefit costs. However, I can tell you that the benefit cost It was very hard to determine, and what we had to do was look at it over the course of because, well, let me go back a step. When an incident occurs in Dallas or San Diego, it might have only been 1 or 2 incidents per week that were of the size that triggered ICM. So then they switched the trigger mechanism to maybe get 4 to 5 to 6 incidents per week. And if they really down-tuned it, they could have got 20 incidents a week, but a lot of those incidents would be what we would consider to be routine, just send out a truck or stalled car by the side of the road type of incident that was causing slowdown. So the bottom line is they didn't get a whole lot of incidents that they could create a very high R-squared value of confidence, if you're familiar with statistics. And so our level of confidence on a few data points was not as strong as what we would say if this was to be calibrated over a period of 5 to 10 years. The savings over 5 to 10 years are illustrated and are promoted in the video. About 7 minutes into the video, one of the speakers comes on and talks about cost benefits in the ratio of 10 to 1 that they perceived out in San Diego. The other problem in doing this was over the 3 years that the project ran in San Diego, there were other improvements that were being made. It's not like everything was stagnant in San Diego. They were adding some lanes, they were adding some signals, they were adding detectors, they were adding VMS messages, and they were improving their HOV flow. So there was a lot of other stuff that goes on that maybe you can't contribute directly to ICM, but in the context of looking at it and saying what would ICM provide in the context of a benefit cost assessment, it would be positive, and over time it would be significant.
Okay, thank you, Neal. We have another question here from Claire. She says, I think some of the technology needed for ICM allows you to operate the facilities more efficiently on a day-to-day basis. So I guess that's just a comment.
Well, yeah, but
we do have another.
Let me just add just very quickly.
Okay.
That goes into what I just said before, and that is that yes, technology is improving. New agencies are adding and adopting and upgrading their equipment, and all of that is good, great, and wonderful. But there's still going to be moments when it's beyond the capacity of simple day-to-day operation to handle a significant event.
Great. Thank you, Neal. Okay, we have another question from Frank. For those that have implemented a robust DSS, how well did the DSS perform in predicting the anticipated outcome of an implemented decision plan, and how often did the ops planners need to refine those plans?
Well, that's a question that people, not to me, I think Frank is asking the community if there are case examples out there, if I'm hearing that question correctly.
Okay. We have another question in the interim. Go ahead, Greg.
That's always, I was just going to say, that's always the trick is, can you go and say that it did a good job in predicting, and oftentimes that step is skipped because of funding and the demands of day-to-day operations. So going back to get some data in that area would be very helpful towards fine-tuning those plans, I would think. But I know one of the things that comes up is when there are changes in the network, whether a new toll road is put in or something like that, different capacity is added, you have to fine-tune your decision support system, to take the network changes into account. So I think it's got to be fairly regular that you go back and try to improve your system to match current conditions.
Yeah, I mean, Greg hit on a very important point, and that is that agencies are moving so fast, a lot of times they don't have time to go back and look at and do a post-event evaluation. It's a great thing to do. Everyone recommends it, but the reality is that not everybody does it. But I can tell you that some of our success is and was represented anecdotally in our surveys with the operators, the agencies, and even the customers in San Diego and Dallas, who said, yeah, things are better. I can't put my finger on it, but we're communicating better. There's better integration. When an event occurs, the mitigations take place in real time, and they don't, nobody waits a half an hour or 40 minutes or an hour, to get equipment out there to begin doing it. A lot of times the traffic control center and the cameras have picked up the event, and the DSS has kicked in alternatives and is suggesting solutions, before everybody can get back to their desk to hit yes, send, and submit that they approve of the DSS plan. So a lot of that takes place, and a lot of the successes, I should say, we hear about anecdotally, but we strongly believe that it's. I mean, there was an early proponent and champion in the Dallas area, and it was Robert Saylor was the traffic engineer for the city of Richardson, and he would tell everyone, we live along US 75, we're south of Dallas, city of Richardson, and I can tell you that I would much rather have ICM working on my behalf than not, and I would much rather have the implementations and understand if an incident that is passing by or is affecting US 75 in the vicinity of my city, how that's affecting my city. I would much rather have that happening than people off on their own trying to find their own solutions and to do it. As I said earlier, I wrote a comment about cat herding. If you don't want to make this cat herding, would you rather do that, or would you rather have some efficacy towards producing a solution? And he was much more the latter in saying, I would much rather be involved in this than not. And that's the kind of anecdotal success that we hear from stakeholders, and we try as much as we can to back it up with objective benefit cost analysis, some of which is in that lessons learned major achievements that people could refer to.
Great. Thank you, Neal. Are you ready for one more question? You have time for one more?
My voice is holding out for one more.
Okay. I'll go here to this question. Funding is one of the biggest constraints to ICM implementation. How can we influence decision makers to make ICM a priority?
Well, I'm gonna let Greg answer. I'm gonna answer first, and then I'll let Greg finish the answer.
Okay.
Excuse me. I think the overarching answer to that question is that once you have a champion stakeholder group identified, then that stakeholder group acts as one in saying, for each of the participant stakeholders, you need to upgrade, or at the opportunity that you have to upgrade your systems, you should do it in such a manner that it would benefit the whole and not just benefit, not just solve a singular problem, but put in a signal system or a ramp system or a media system or a VMS system or a gantry system or whatever it is, HOV system, that's going to benefit the greater good and not just, the 1 to 3 to 5 intersections that might be a particular problem. So the short answer is, the overarching answer is that the stakeholder group would act as the ombudsman to promote across the board that if any agency were to upgrade its equipment, that they would do it in a manner that would be conducive to the larger stakeholder group. Did I say that right, Greg?
Absolutely. Well, so the only thing I would add is that, it's certainly, you got to make it clear to decision makers where ICM can make a difference, and that's why you need to focus on getting an early win that makes it kind of obvious that ICM has value for your area. Whether it's just major incidents or special events, something like that, severe weather, but document those kinds of events so that you can point to that as proof of the value of ICM. Maybe down the road you have more benefit cost data that you can showcase, but But I think all the stakeholders need to understand the benefits to their agencies. So we're all in this together kind of approach, like Neal was saying, is I think the way to go there for that. And there's and with funding information as well, there's some funding information in the document. And as you can see from the responses, federal, state, regional, local funds are all being used by the participants of this webinar. So that's very encouraging in that it's diversifying the funding sources for ICM implementation. That's it.
Okay, great. Neal, Greg, did you have any closing remarks before I close it out? Anything, last words?
My last words are to you, Deborah, and to the Center of Excellence team. Thank you very much for hosting this. You made Greg's and my participation, and John Hicks. We didn't hear from John, but he's an integral partner of us putting together the webinar today. But the whole Federal Highways team wants to thank you and the Center of Excellence group for hosting this and making our afternoon relatively easy.
You are most welcome. We appreciate it. We really do. Okay,
and thank you to everyone who stood with us. Thank you.
Absolutely. So yes, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Absolutely want to thank our panelists. We had some great information here today. So like I mentioned in the beginning, a recorded version of this webinar along with the presentation slides will be available on the NOCOE website. So on behalf of NOCOE and our presenters, thank you so much for joining us today and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.